The train pulled away like a long sigh, disappearing into the dark, its iron wheels groaning across the tracks before fading into the desert night. Smoke drifted lazily above the station, curling toward the pale stars. When the noise finally died, the small wooden platform returned to its usual silence, broken only by the restless whisper of wind moving through dry grass beyond the rails. Under the dim lantern that swayed above the bench sat a young woman wrapped in a worn shawl. The light touched her copper skin and dark braided hair, revealing eyes swollen from crying. She looked no older than 22, though grief had already placed a quiet heaviness on her shoulders. Her name was Lila Redbird, and by morning she had been a wife. By nightfall she had been told to leave. Her husband's death had come quickly in the mines outside town, a sudden collapse of rock and dust that ended a life before anyone could shout a warning. By afternoon the family had gathered in stiff silence around the small house where she had lived since her wedding day. They had spoken gently, almost kindly, but their words held the firmness of a door closing. "There's no place for you here now," her husband's older brother had said, avoiding her eyes. The words had carried the weight of final judgment. So Lila packed what little she owned into a cloth bundle and boarded the evening train, hoping distance might dull the sharp edges of the day. But when the conductor came for her ticket at the halfway stop, the last of her coins fell short. He let her ride only as far as the next station. And now the train was gone. The station master had locked his office and left for the night, leaving the lantern burning above the platform like a lonely star. Lila sat very still, as if movement might shatter the fragile calm she was holding together. The wind tugged softly at her shawl. Somewhere far out in the darkness, a coyote called. She lowered her head and pressed her hands together in her lap, trying to quiet the tremble that would not leave her fingers. Footsteps approached along the dirt road beside the tracks. They were steady, unhurried, the sound of boots that had walked long distances and carried little fear of the dark. A tall man stepped into the lantern's glow, leading a saddled horse behind him. His coat was dusted with the pale powder of the road, and his hat shadowed a face weathered by sun and quiet years. This was Caleb Ward, though most people in town simply called him Ward. He lived alone in a small cabin beyond the cottonwoods, working odd ranch jobs and repairing fences for neighboring farms. Folks described him as dependable, which in the West was another way of saying a man spoke little but did what needed doing. He had planned to sleep near the station that night before riding out again at dawn. But the sight of the young woman sitting alone beneath the lantern made him pause. Caleb tied his horse to the rail and lifted his saddle down, placing it against the wall. For a moment he pretended to busy himself with the straps, giving the stranger space the way a person does when they sense sorrow nearby. Still, he noticed the way her shoulders shook slightly in the cold. "The next train won't pass through till morning," he said gently. His voice was calm and low, careful not to startle her. Lila lifted her eyes slowly. They were dark and glistening, like wet earth after rain. "I know," she replied. Her voice was soft, almost uncertain, as if speaking itself required strength she wasn't sure she still possessed. Caleb nodded once and leaned against the wall beside the saddle. Silence settled between them again, thick but not unfriendly. After a moment he spoke once more. "You traveling somewhere particular?" The question lingered in the air. Lila seemed to search for the right answer, though perhaps the truth was the only one she had left. "I was," she said quietly. Her gaze drifted toward the empty tracks where the train had vanished. "I'm not anymore." The wind stirred again, carrying the faint smell of coal smoke. Caleb studied her for a long second. In frontier towns a man learned not to pry into a stranger's troubles, but something about the fragile steadiness in her voice made the silence feel heavier than questions ever could. Then she spoke again, almost as if confessing something she feared might break her completely if left unsaid. "I'm a housewife," she murmured. Her hands tightened together. "And I lost my husband today." The words landed between them with quiet finality. Caleb felt his chest tighten slightly. He had seen grief before, more times than he cared to remember, but hearing it spoken so plainly carried its own kind of weight. Lila swallowed before continuing. "My husband worked in the mines outside Red Hollow," she said. "The ground gave way this morning." She didn't describe it further. She didn't need to. In the West, accidents were understood without explanation. My husband's family told me I should go, she added softly. They said a woman alone is a burden they can't carry. Her voice did not tremble when she said it. That was perhaps the saddest part. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck thoughtfully. He had known men who treated kin that way when times turned hard. Survival in the frontier often narrowed people's compassion until it disappeared altogether. Lila lifted her gaze again, meeting his eyes for the first time without lowering them. "Will you let me stay somewhere safe tonight?" she asked. There was no pleading in her voice. No demand either. Only tired honesty. Caleb looked toward the dark road that led back to town. He could already imagine what people would say if they saw him walking home with a young widow. Small towns carried long memories and short patience for explanations. But he also remembered a winter years ago when he had slept in a barn after losing everything he owned. A stranger had offered him a blanket and a place beside the fire without asking questions. Kindness had kept him alive that night. He pushed away from the wall and picked up his saddle. "My cabin's a mile past the cottonwoods," he said simply. "You can stay there." Lila blinked in quiet surprise. "Just till morning," he added. Relief passed across her face so softly it was almost invisible. "Thank you," she whispered. They walked down the dusty road together beneath a sky full of cold stars. Caleb led the horse while Lila followed a few steps behind, her shawl wrapped tight against the night air. From the second-floor window of the boarding house, Mrs. Dalton watched them pass. She leaned forward, curiosity sharpening her narrow eyes. A lone ranch hand bringing home a young widow in the middle of the night was the kind of sight that fed small-town stories for weeks. By sunrise, half the town would know. Caleb's cabin stood near the edge of a quiet grove where cottonwood trees rustled softly in the wind. It was small but sturdy, built with patient hands and long evenings of work. Inside, the room smelled faintly of pine wood and coffee grounds. Caleb lit a lantern and placed it on the table. "You can take the bed," he said, setting his saddle near the door. "I'll sleep outside." Lila shook her head immediately. "No. I can sleep on the floor." He gave a small shrug. "We'll figure it out." The simple words carried no awkwardness, only practical kindness. For the first time since morning, Lila felt something unfamiliar settling inside her chest. Not happiness, but something close to safety. Outside, the wind moved gently through the cottonwoods, whispering across the dark fields. And though neither of them could see it yet, the quiet choice made that night beneath a lonely station lantern had already begun to change the course of both their lives.